Aside from the fact that the hostages were in danger, the three perpetrators looked nothing like the kind of individuals who would commit such a crime. One of them was identified as George Darren, a delivery man in his late 30s with one speeding ticket in his driving record 2 years ago. The other one was a female cook in her early 40s named Sarah Beck. The third hostage taker was an unemployed young woman named Marissa Johnson who had no record of offenses as well. Armed with 2 handguns and a pair of hand grenades, they infiltrated a fast food restaurant around 12:30 p.m. while the streets were full and the roads were bustling. They kept 46 customers who were inside the establishment at the time of their arrival. They were mostly employees and students who only came there for their lunch break. The establishment was a corner location to a row of food chains and other small businesses. Since most people pass along there to eat and head to work, the location was a hotspot and was regularly patrolled. It was clearly not the best location to hold hostages since they could easily be cornered by authorities, and the huge glass windows of the building made it even harder to hide. Perhaps it was due to their lack of experience in doing a crime, or perhaps they chose this specific location with the intention to draw in a large crowd. Bystanders and friends of the hostages gathered at the street while 2 police cars came and parked on both sides. Nobody knew then that this event would turn into a catastrophic tragedy that left a deep scar in our hearts and forever haunted our memories. The only man in this small group of hostage takers strung up hand grenades between the handles of the 2 entryways. The pin was attached to one side while the shell was strung to the other. If the door was opened, the pin would be pulled out. There was also a string wrapped around his shoulders and attached to the grenade. If he was ever shot down and fell on the floor, his weight would also pull out the pin and trigger the explosion. Oddly enough, everything inside the establishment was functioning normally, as if it wasn't taken over by criminals. They allowed their hostages to order food and even use their phones. They just remained in their seats while the fast food staff was handling their orders. When they saw me across the street along with my camera crew, they asked me to come closer so I could conduct an interview. The way they were so lenient with their hostages was quite strange to say the least, and then everything got even weirder when they told me their one and only demand. For some reason, the 3 hostage takers wanted the bridge to be closed. Their demand sounded simple, but the bridge across the river was the only thing that was connecting us to the rest of the world. Hundreds of people were passing that bridge on a daily basis. If it were to close, businesses and other common affairs would suffer. Because of the impact that it would cause, the authorities denied their request. I tried to explain to them why the bridge cannot be closed, and the 3 hostage takers suddenly grew distressed. The cook, Sarah, began to cry, and George got really mad. When I asked them the reason why they wanted to close the bridge, it was then when this peculiar case suddenly turned supernatural. They told me that they perpetrated this crime in order to force the people to listen and stop a tragedy from happening. The 3 hostage takers claimed that the bridge would collapse that day, and hundreds of people would die. I asked them what this basis was for this serious claim, and they said that they all saw a premonition about this tragic event. Some of their hostages laughed while the others were annoyed. We broadcasted the interview live, and the viewers had a lot of things to say about the matter. While most of the feedback was just mockeries and negative criticisms, some had genuine questions and wanted to know more about the premonition. Personally, I did not believe it either, but it was my job to televise the situation and serve as a bridge for the people and the culprits. I asked them how they saw this premonition and if there was anything else aside from this upcoming tragedy. One by one, they started sharing information. They said that they were receiving their predictions in a form of vivid visions that just pop up in their heads, but each of their premonitions were only related to the things that they were interested in. If ever any of these were accurate, then the legitimacy of their claims would be seen in a different light. Sarah Beck was into Hollywood, and she claimed that a particular celebrity who was reported dead was still alive and living overseas. Unfortunately, this claim was hard to prove without any evidence. However, the premonition of Marissa Johnson could be easily proven. She was into college basketball since some of her friends were in a team. An inter-school competition was taking place that day, and she said that she had the vision of the game. She claimed that her former school would win, but the player wearing the number 13 would suffer a leg injury. At the moment, the game was just in its first quarter. Some of the viewers got intrigued and they started watching the game to see if her prediction would be right. On the other hand, George Darren's information was rather controversial. He was into politics, and he claimed that the governor's youngest daughter was having a child. This was a serious accusation since she was just 17 years old at the time. Aside from these trivial predictions, the most significant premonition that they all shared was the collapse of the bridge. They didn't even know about each other before until they saw their posts in a public forum where they mentioned their concern. As they were speaking, they claimed that they were still having glimpses of the tragedy. George confronted the others and told them that he was no longer having the glimpses. Sarah said that they must have done enough to warn the people about the matter, but then her statement changed after a few minutes when she and Marissa still saw the vision as if it was a passing memory. A few moments later, the situation in the building suddenly got worse. The other hostages grew frustrated when they realized that they were being held in for a supernatural cause. The fact of the matter was the three perpetrators did not look imposing nor threatening despite of their weapons. A few men from the hostages decided to step up and force their way out. They grabbed the seats and started slamming them on the windows to shatter the glass. The relatively calm situation suddenly escalated into a commotion. Melissa pointed his gun to the man in an attempt to stop him, but another guy jumped her from the side and restrained her on the floor. My crew and the authorities were just outside the building as the chaos unfolded. George was strung in the hand grenade that he attached to the door, and he could not move from his spot. Sarah was unarmed, and the other hostages got aggressive when she tried to fight back. When George saw that the two girls were being assaulted, he finally fired his gun and shot a man. As a result, the police opened fire. They rushed through the shattered glass door and immediately grabbed the strings to stop the pin of the grenade from being pulled out. They could have done this a while ago, but the situation at the time was fairly calm and they expected it to end in its own without any casualties. Unfortunately, 2 people died in the hostage taking. Sarah Beck and Marissa Johnson were both arrested, and the body of George went straight to the morgue. Just when we thought that it was already over, we realized that the worst was yet to come. As I was on air to report the conclusion of the crime, a viewer called the studio and said that Marissa's prediction came true. Her former school won the basketball competition, and the player number 13 had injured his leg during the game. The reporters in the studio were dumbfounded by this information. Even I didn't know how to react to it. I was taken aback. I started to question if everything they said was true. And it was then when we were hit by a very heartbreaking news. Approximately 15 minutes after the situation at the fast food restaurant had reached its conclusion, the bridge unexpectedly collapsed. The portion of the steel rods that supported it in the air suddenly snapped, and the rest uncoiled when it lost its balance. There were hundreds of motorists on board during the collapse, and roughly 70% of them had died. Those who managed to hang on at the ends of the bridge were the only ones who made it alive. The rest who were still in their vehicles during the collapse were sunk in the water and got buried by the debris. This catastrophic incident left everyone completely baffled and traumatized. The prediction of the hostage takers was true, and they did what they could to save these people. Unfortunately, we took their claims as mere trivial topics of short discussion for airtime. I couldn't help but feel guilty about it, especially since one of them was killed in the process. I then realized why George stopped seeing the vision of the collapsing bridge. He was no longer around to see it happen. Something changed his fate, and we could have done the same for the others. Several months after the tragedy, an anonymous caller claimed that he saw the governor's daughter coming out of a clinic with a noticeably plumped belly that she was desperately trying to hide inside her jacket. Apparently, the other prediction of George Darren also came true.